get the. Good afternoon and welcome to Stock Talk. My name is Sean Kabak and I will be your host. We will give participants a little bit of time to be able to access the presentations, and we will begin. Manitoba Agriculture is offering a series of livestock and forage webinars to help Manitoba beef producers in the management of their cattle operations. These webinars will run monthly until April. We are glad you can join us for today's presentations, which will be recorded so you can view them at a future date, or if you can't make the 1 o'clock start, you can watch the presentations later. This year, we are continuing with our Stock Talk online webinars, and we will be holding in-person extension events. That means provincial events like Manitoba Ag Days and Manitoba Beef and Forage Week will take place, and I'll tell you more about the Beef and Forage Days later in the webinar. For producers who signed up for the herd management program, claim forms are being sent out by either email or regular mail. So if you haven't received yours yet, it's on the way. If you have questions during the talk, feel free to submit them by typing them into your computer. This year's feed supplies, especially forages, are much more plentiful than the last couple of drought years. Livestock producers may have lots of volume, but quality isn't as good. So this means producers still need to properly balance their rations to meet their livestock requirements. And to start off today's presentation, we have Dr. John McKinnon, and he will talk about beef cattle nutrition and in particular cow rations. And John's presentation was pre-recorded, but he's with us today to take questions. So we'll start his video shortly.
Pam, are you able to share that recording? I'm trying. Always works great in practice, eh? You can't hear the audio, Sean. Did you make sure that you checked it over to share audio?
To target the desired level of production.
There we go.
So points in there, adequate intake, required nutrients, an economic package, and then meeting whatever level of production you want. We've got maintenance needs, which basically are simply keeping the animal alive, letting it exist in the type of winters we get in Western Canada, the energy required to graze, to get up to the feed bunk, etc. It's simply keeping that animal alive. And then there is nutrients that are going to be required for whatever level of production that we're looking at. And that include gestation, include lactation, or it could include growth. And it's important to recognize that these nutrients are utilized by the animal in an order of priority. So they're always going to use the nutrients that it consumes first for maintenance, because it's got to keep itself alive. If it doesn't keep itself alive, none of these production needs are very important after that, right? So it's always going to meet its maintenance needs, then typically it will prioritize nutrients for lactation and gestation, and then finally for growth. Okay, so these are why the nutrients are required. What nutrients are we concerned about? You know, energy isn't exactly a nutrient. We consider it as one, but it's sort of a summation of a lot of the nutrients in a feed, whether it's fat, fiber, protein that contributes to the energy of the animal. But we're certainly concerned with providing the animal with enough energy for maintenance as well as for whatever level of production we're interested in. Protein, minerals, vitamins, and one that we don't always think about, making sure the animal has an adequate supply of water. One of the rules of thumb that I like to keep in the back of my mind when I'm putting together rations is that cattle eat to meet their energy needs. What they actually consume will vary depending upon the quality of the diet. If we take a 1,300-pound cow, typically that animal is going to consume somewhere between 1.75 and 2.25% of its body weight. That you usually find them eating within that range. So that 1,300-pound cow, it's going to be somewhere between 23 and 30 pounds of dry matter. On an as-fed basis of hay, that would be 26 to 35 pounds of hay. And if it was just silage that was going into those animals, it would be 65 to 86 pounds of silage, depending on the range. So that's 23 to 30 pounds of dry matter. That's a considerable range. And what you often find is that where the animal actually settles in there depends upon the quality of the feed that's in front of that animal. So if you look at forage quality, if you look at slough hay, poor quality hay, you look at straws, typically you'll find consumption somewhere between 1.25% and 1.5% of body weight. That's what I use as a rule of thumb when I'm putting rations together. They'll eat a little bit more than that, but particularly if you get into cold weather in the wintertime, if they've got free choice access to straw, you want to be a little bit worried about the potential for impaction of those animals, because their intake will go up because of the cold weather, and if it's not a digestible forage that they're consuming, that rumen can get impacted. So you want to be careful. So I use a rule of thumb between 1.25% and 1.5% body weight for straw. Medium quality feed, typically 1.5% to 1.75%. And on a high quality feed, alfalfa grass, hay, alfalfa hay, they eat at a higher level, or they can eat at a higher level. And that difference between the poor, medium, and quality is just related to digestibility, right? So the higher the quality of the feed, the more digestible it is, the more passage rate is going through the animal, and so they can consume more. Doesn't mean that they have to, but they can because of that higher quality. Other effects, cold stress. So if we look at cows in mid-gestation in January, you might see increase anywhere from 10 to 30% increase in intake as we get into some significantly cold weather. As you get closer to calving, intake actually decreases somewhat, simply because of the lack of room, because of the increase in size of the fetus pressing on the rumen. And then post-calving, particularly as lactation kicks in, you can see intake increase fairly rapidly to 2 to 2.2% of body weight. When you look at intakes of feeder cattle, it's a little bit different. So if we look at freshly weaned calves, if you think of them particularly that have gone through the auction market, have ended up at a feedlot somewhere, say from St. Rose, and they've ended up somewhere in Alberta, those calves are missing their mom, they've been trucked, they've been mixed. So they're under a lot of stress when they get to that feedlot. and those intakes for that first 2 to 3 weeks in that feedlot are going to be reduced, and that's a real challenge for those feedlots, because a calf that's only eating at 1% of body weight is going to be susceptible to a lot of bacterial and viral challenges. So as that calf, freshly weaned calf, gets used to its environment, it gets on feed, typically what you'll see, the intake starting to plateau somewhere around 2.5 to 2.7% of body weight. So they'll reach that level and they'll plateau there for a level. So, 2.5% of body weight on a 500-pound calf, that's 12.5 pounds of dry matter. As that calf goes through the feeding period, it's getting heavier, its body weight is increasing, its intake is increasing, but that's a ratio, right? Intake as a percent of body weight is a ratio, and the body weight increases faster than the actual intake does. So over time, as a percent of body weight, you start to see intake dropping off. Yearlings, when they first come in, it might be up at 2.6%, but they start dropping off the longer they're on feed. And if you look at finished cattle, say 1,400 pound, 1,500 pound finished cattle in a feedlot, they're likely eating at 1.67% of body weight, right? That's still 26, 27 pounds of dry matter or more, but as a percent of body weight, because they're so heavy, it's dropped off. Okay? And a lot of finishing feedlots will actually sell those cattle when their intakes are that low, 1.5 to 1.6% of body weight. So those are just kind of targets, if you will, if you want to look at where cattle should be eating. Those are kind of targets that I use where I expect them to be. So let's, with this presentation, I'm really going to look at energy and protein in terms of the nutrients. And let's look first at, it's by far and away the nutrient that's required in the largest amounts. We often think of protein as the most expensive nutrients to supply to cattle. But when you actually calculate out how much energy is costing you, it's the nutrient required in the largest amount, and it is the most costly to supply. It keeps the animal alive and productive, it keeps them pregnant, it keeps them milking, and it keeps them growing. When you look at the factors that affect the energy requirements, how much a cow out in, say, bale grazing here, how much energy does she actually need? In terms of maintenance requirement, her body weight is going to be a big determining factor of that. The environment's going to be a big determining factor of that. And then the condition of that animal in terms of her body fat stores, hide thickness, hair coat thickness, etc. All of those are going to contribute to how much energy she needs for maintenance in particular. And I just took an example here using cow bites, energy requirements of a 1,300-pound cow. So this would be about this time of the year, second trimester. So she's in a condition score of 3. So she's in pretty good condition. -10 temperature. So she's not really stressed from an environmental perspective. So cow bites would say this cow needs about 13 pounds of TDN a day. It needs about 1.5 pounds of protein. And in this case, could meet it with 18 pounds of grass hay, 12 pounds of straw, and a little bit of a TM salt, vitamin A, D, and E mix. What happens if we drop that to -30? Okay, so all of a sudden now we've exposed that cow to a severe drop in temperature, which is not uncommon in this part of the country. And you can see what really happens here is her energy requirement has jumped from 14 or to 14.5 pounds from that 13 pounds of TDN. So about a 12% increase in energy requirements. And that's simply to keep her warm, simply to allow her to generate heat to meet her increased maintenance requirements. The protein hasn't changed at all. The cold stress has not affected protein requirements. It's affected her energy requirements. And of course, to meet that, you can see I had to add 4 pounds of barley to do that with those particular feeds. So I think when it comes to nutrition and reproductive success, there's two critical periods that we have to think about in the sort of the pregnancy calendar of a beef cow. The last trimester or the last 90 days prior to calving. So that's the time period where we get the majority of fetal growth. And as you get 6 to 8 weeks and closer, more and more weight gain is being occurred by the fetus. More and more nutrients have to be transferred from the dam to the fetus. And during this last trimester, you'll see a 25% increase in TDN requirements over and above what we saw in the second trimester. Okay, you'll see protein requirements increase by a third. Calcium, phosphorus, vitamin requirements will all increase. The second critical period, calving through breeding and where we see lactation and rebreeding coming into effect, we see a further increase in requirements over and above the last trimester. So a 17% increase over what we saw in the third trimester. Another third increase in protein requirements. A huge increase in calcium requirements because of the need for lactation, right? So what you see here is in the last trimester, the cow is supplying nutrients to the growing fetus. Here, she's via milk production, she's supplying nutrients to the calf at her side. And remember, she's also trying to recover from the stress of calving, right? She's also trying to get her reproductive system, the uterine involution, to get that whole rebreeding activity back in cycle again. So it's critical that we make sure we supply adequate nutrients in this time period. And on moderate to good condition cows, you don't want to see them losing weight in that last trimester. So particularly the last 8 weeks of pregnancy, you don't want to see them losing weight from calving through breeding, because that's going to have negative effects either on the amount of time it takes for them to come back into heat, or it's going to have negative effects on first service conception rates. Either way, it's going to start to spread out your breeding season and subsequent calving seasons. If you've got cows coming into the last trimester in good condition, if their condition score is 3.5 to 4, you can let them use a little bit of that condition over the winter. But in this particular time frame, you don't want to see them losing weight. Sort of another rule of thumb I think that's important to keep in the back of your mind is to account for the effects of cold weather. So as I showed earlier, when you get into severe cold stress, basically what happens is the animal's maintenance requirements for energy increases, right? So 1% more energy for every degree below the lower critical temperature, and that often will translate into 2 pounds of extra grain at -20, 4 pounds at -30, and 5 at -35. That's so important simply because cows can lose conditions so quickly in that cold weather if it's extended and you don't accommodate their needs. On feeder cattle, things are a little different there. Animals have of a given body weight. So here I got a 500-pound steer. That animal is going to have a certain requirement for maintenance, just like a 1,300-pound cow. And you can see at the bottom that requirement is about 4.5 megacalories of net energy for maintenance. Okay. Then depending upon what we want to get out of that calf, and here it's in basically a backgrounding situation. You want to gain in 1.5 pounds, 2 pounds a day, 2.25, 2.5. How fast we want it to grow, how productive we want it to grow, will all depend upon the energy density of the diet that we're feeding it. And I'll come back to this a little bit later. But you can see that as the rate of gain increases, we have to increase the TDN content of the diet. We're increasing more, we're supplying more megacalories of net energy for gain. So that's the gain or the energy that's from the diet that's left over after maintenance has been used first. That gain is left over, and the amount that we're supplying will dictate the rate of gain. So let's quickly go through some of the different sources of energy that we see out there. So certainly the cereal grains, whether it's barley, wheat, corn, etc., would be, if you will, our Cadillac of feed that would for supplying energy. So you can see that corn at 90% TDN, wheat at 88%, barley at 82%, oats would fall behind a little bit at 76%. But all of them are relatively good sources of energy for backgrounding cattle, for supplying energy to wintering beef cows. Also keep in mind when you look at the protein, and these are average values, keep that in mind too, but they're fairly typical values that you'll see. Keep in mind the protein side of things as well. So wheat, 14, 15% protein is not uncommon. Barley, anywhere from, I've seen it at 10, I've seen it at 13, 11 is pretty common. Corn, 7.5% to maybe 11%. And lactating animals, growing 12.5 to 15%, depending upon how fast the calves are growing and their weight. You can see that these cereal grains are supplying a fair bit of the protein animals that we're using or feed. If we go to some of the typical forages that are out there, you can see that they're, from an energy perspective, they're a whole class lower or a whole step lower than our cereal grains, right? So instead of 88 or 82% TDN, we're looking, in alfalfa, typically around that, on an average quality alfalfa, 61 to maybe a little better than that, depending upon how early it was cut. But 58% for alfalfa grass hay, 56% for good grass hay, slew hay maybe down around 52% or 50%. So they're a step lower. The more legume that's in that hay, the better the energy content typically. And now you look at they're a pretty good source of protein typically, particularly with legumes in there. And the grass hay could be anywhere from 10 to 13%. They're a step lower in terms of energy than what we would see with our cereal grains. If we go now to some of the straws that are out there, whether it's wheat, barley straw, or some of the pulse straws tend to be the best from a energy and a protein perspective than either barley or wheat. You can see that they're another step lower than even our forages, right? So we were dealing with 82% in barley. We're dealing with 60 to 62% or so in, say, an alfalfa grass hay, and now we're down in the low 40s with the straws, right? And when it comes to a wintering beef cow, any of those straws won't supply enough energy for a wintering beef cow, no matter what the environment. And typically there's not enough protein there either, particularly in barley or wheat straw. So straw-based rations require supplementation. They require supplementation with energy. They require supplementation with protein, as well as minerals and vitamins. So a little bit depending upon when they're sampled. We heard earlier about corn deteriorating a little bit over the course of the winter. If we look at oat or barley cut as green feed for swath grazing, we're pretty similar to some of the alfalfa grass, good grass hays in both energy and protein. And this whole crop corn, you can look at the whole plant and it's typically 60 to 65% TDN and somewhere around that 7 to 8% protein. And you can see that tends to be somewhat an average of both the grain and the stover. So it's certainly important to know the nutrient content of the feeds that you're dealing. You can see that there's a tremendous range in terms of what they're supplying for energy, as well as what they're supplying for protein. When it comes to protein, it's you know, the second most important nutrient quantitatively. When we have to go out and buy it, when we're buying some of these protein supplements, whether it's distillers grains or some of the blocks that are out there, or protein from you know, canola meal or from a commercial mill, it is certainly expensive to buy. It's important though, you know, it's providing the building blocks for muscle growth. You know, there's different components to the protein. I talked a little bit about it earlier, that fermentation changes the nature of the protein in the rumen, and you know, we can talk about protein being degradable, so it's degradable to the rumen microbes, or it's bypass protein that gets degraded in the lower intestine and absorbed there, or in the case of that really burnt protein, that browning reaction protein that was so black, it goes right through the animal, right? So it's important that diets are formulated to both a degradable protein as well as an undegradable protein if you want to truly match the protein needs of your animal. There's the potential in certain classes of cattle to feed non-protein nitrogen, so basically sources of urea that provides ammonia to those cattle in the rumen, so it's providing ammonia to the rumen bugs. In most cow-calf situations, most backgrounding situations, you don't see a lot of urea being fed, simply because there has to be a fair bit of energy in the diet that goes along with it that allows the bugs to capture the ammonia that's released from the urea. So there's a lot of different protein sources that are out there. If you remember, as I went through our cereal grains, as I went through the forages, they're certainly variable in protein content, but they certainly form a base of your ration, and they're going to supply the majority of the protein those animals need, particularly for wintering beef cows. If you do have to come back and buy some supplemental protein, there's a lot of byproducts that are out there that I'm sure we'll hear more of in the ration or in the talk that's coming up. Certainly, Minnedosa is just down the road, right, with that big ethanol plant there, and that would be wheat-based distillers grains that you see there in the picture, and they're certainly widely used in backgrounding and finishing diets, as well as a lot of commercial supplements from meals. Yeah, I think when you look at them, they're a very convenient way of supplying minerals and vitamins. Okay, so if someone talks to me about saying I'm having a hard time getting adequate mineral nutrition of those animals, I wouldn't have any issue with them using. But if they're coming to me and wanting to supply protein or energy from these tubs, the tubs that are out there today are really designed for minimum intake, right? They're 100 to 150 grams a day of what these animals are consuming. You can do the calculation, even if it's an 18% or 25% lick tub. In 100 grams, they're not getting sufficient protein to meet their needs if you're short. So it's not an ideal way of supplying energy or protein. The other issue with protein in these tubs is a lot of them are urea based, okay? And it gets back to that issue I was talking about, that if there's not a subsequent supply of adequate energy at the same time the animal is consuming this urea, then what happens is the urea is broken down in the rumen, it's absorbed across the gut, and it goes out in the urine. So it's wasted, right? So there has to be a concurrent utilization of energy and protein to make maximum, or urea and protein, urea and energy to make maximum use of the urea. Okay, so to answer your question, from a mineral vitamin point of view, they're a very convenient way. From a protein point of view, they're lacking. Crude protein requirements of a 1,300-pound cow, you know, it's going to depend upon stage of gestation. So second trimester, somewhere in the neighborhood of 1.75 pounds a day, 2 pounds a day, third trimester, 2.5 pounds a day post-calving. So you often hear a rule of thumb, 7, 9, 11 as a rule of thumb, second, third, and post-calving for protein requirements. When you look at backgrounded cattle, in this case it would be backgrounded and finishing, you can see that the protein requirement here, it's being shown in relation to dietary energy, but really it's being shown in relationship to the rate of gain. So as the energy content of the diet increases, the rate of gain is going to increase, and the protein requirement has to increase concurrently. So this 770-pound steer is typically going to be on a diet here around 70% TDN or better, and it's going to need initially around that 13% protein. As it gets bigger and its energy intake increases, that will start to drop off a little bit. So I think the take-home message when you're formulating diets for wintering beef cows and for backgrounding cattle, you really want to remember that there's changing energy and protein requirements of your cows with stage of pregnancy and lactation, and you have to meet those requirements if you want to meet the needs of the growing fetus and the subsequent calf at her side, and to keep that cow on a 365-day calving interval. With feeder cattle, energy and protein requirements are going to change primarily with its body weight, so its maintenance requirements are going to increase as it gets bigger, and its protein requirements are going to be a direct result. Energy and protein requirements are going to be a direct result of your expected gain in the animals. Okay, so I'll switch gears.
So we'll end the presentation there. We'd like to thank John for giving us a nutrition update on cow and backgrounder rations. We really appreciate his participation. We have John on the line. Just wondering if John can unmute himself to make sure that we can hear him.
How's that?
Yeah, sounds good, John. John's a consultant right now with the JJM Nutrition, and he's a former prof at the U of S. So lots of experience in the cattle industry and feeding cattle. So we really appreciate his participation with our webinar today. So a question that I had, John, was especially with younger calves or smaller calves, kind of in that 500 to 600 pound weight range, is there a maximum silage we can feed? With silage being a lot bulkier, being a lot higher moisture, we can't go with a full silage ration, but is there kind of some general guidelines as to how much silage we can maybe start them out on and how we can progress up with more silage as producers are starting to harvest and use silage more in the rations?
Yeah, I guess one of the things that I worry about when we're feeding too much silage to these lightweight calves is just the bulkiness of it, the amount of moisture that's coming along with that high level of silage in the diet. And what I try to do when I formulate diets is Ideally, I'm keeping the dry matter content of the diet at 50% or better. Sometimes I'll let it drop to about 45% dry matter, but I don't like to see it go any lower than that. These lightweight calves, even if they're onto silage, just cannot eat enough at that very high moisture level in the diet. So 50% or better total mixed ration dry matter is where I like to see it at.
Okay, thanks. And with mature animals, there's really no concerns or issues with maxing out the silage, I guess?
No, you can go, pretty much as high as you want. I guess the question is, they start to go through the silage pile pretty quick, particularly if they're bred cows and you don't need the energy in that silage to maintain them, right? So it's always nice to be able to have something, whether it's straw or oat hulls or some poor quality hay, that you can kind of dilute the energy content of that diet down without having to consume too much of that as straight silage.
Right. No, that's good. And I know sometimes producers have the question, or when we're used to feeding a dry hay that's kind of 85% dry matter, and then they go to something like silage that's 35% dry matter, they can't, sometimes it's hard to get their head around that they have to feed now, say, close to 100 pounds of that silage to get enough dry matter into them. And that's why it's always good to work back our rations on a dry matter basis, especially when we're feeding different feed types with varying moisture levels.
Yeah, it's really important to be able to make that conversion from as fed to dry matter and back, simply because you can get caught, particularly when you are changing rations and you have a supplement that might have a specific formulation for trace minerals, or maybe some feed additives like an ionophore in there, that if you don't account for changing moisture levels in the feed as you change ingredients, the concentration that you're actually feeding of some of these trace minerals or your feed additives can change significantly, to the point that you could either be in a deficiency situation or you're not getting the benefit of that feed additive because you're no longer feeding enough of it.
Okay, thanks, John. Pam, did you have any questions from our participants online?
There are none at the moment, Sean. Nope.
Okay, well, I'd like to thank John once again for his participation, and we appreciate him being able to give us his viewpoint on cattle and backgrounding rations. So thank you.
You bet. Thank you. And again, thanks for the invitation to attend the seminar, and enjoyed it.
Thanks. So we're going to switch gears a bit and move over to talk about cow-calf and backgrounding cost of production. And so with us, we have Ben Ham, and he's a farm management specialist with Manitoba Agriculture. And I will turn it over to him. And I'm just going to pull up his presentation.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Sean. It's nice to be here with everyone. It's always nice to hear John speak. Winter feed rations is by far the largest operating expense in our cow-calf and backgrounding industries. So it's very important to have our rations balanced and our costs figured out in those rations. So I'm going to talk very briefly today about the cow-calf and background and cost of production. I could talk, on each of those budgets, probably 2 hours each, about these budgets. They are designed to be calculators for individual producers. It's not me dictating what the costs are in the cow-calf and backgrounding industries. It's a tool designed for producers to use to tailor every one of the costs I have in there to make them their own, so that when they go through this budget, they now can have their own cost of production. So that's what I want to highlight right to start off with, that these are tools to be used by individuals to create their own cost of production. I can go through the budget I put together, but what I've learned to appreciate over the years is that every operation that I've come across out there is very unique. So this one cost of production I had put together isn't relevant to any producer other than the one that that is exactly what I have in there for assumptions. So with that, I'll start. Just want to talk a little bit about where we're at as an industry. After the drought in 2021, our herd did continue to shrink. Jan 1, 2022, we're at 363,000 head here in Manitoba, just to give us an idea of what the cow herd in Manitoba is doing. This is just another chart showing a steady decline since BSC. When we had the peak cow in the province, we did continue to see that decline. Even in the profitable years of 2014 and 15, those significant profitable years did not increase our cow herd. So something just to watch and monitor, but that's where we're at as an industry. Bred heifers, we aren't showing an indication that we are expanding yet. So we'll have to see some more significant profitability out there to see that's expansion, and that'll show up in our breeding herd retention in our beef heifers. Just in comparison, US has similar issues that we have with drought and things like that, and they're also in that steady decline mode. We are getting close to that point where they were in 2014 and 15 when it comes to the bottom of the level of inventories they do have there. So something to keep a very close eye on. That may be an indicator where our 10-year cycle is and when the potential next spike will be for profitability in the cow-calf industry. So this is the cow-calf budget. It's the latest one we've got released. This one that I'm going to talk about today is based on a 300 cow herd and a corn silage ration. Feed costs, like I said, is by far the largest operating expense, 35%, with the other operating, at a 39%, and then fixed and labor and living making up the balance of the cost. So just a chart to depict what it looks like for a total cost of production on a cow-calf operation. This is just highlighting that in our ration, with the feed we are using, we're just under $500 per cow for winter feed costs. We are using a corn silage ration. This has been balanced. We are feeding a 47-pound corn silage ration with 19-pound straw, and it's costing us about $1.93 per head per day. This is one of the simplest charts and one of the most important charts I can talk about when it comes to cow rations. Any one of you as producers can go and update this chart with the price that he can get any of those feedstuffs or produce them at. It's up to you if you want to use market price or cost to produce on those feedstuffs, but that will very quickly tell you what is the cheapest ration you can feed, because in the bottom it says cost per head per day. So in this scenario here, with corn silage at $45 a ton, we're at about $1.93 per head per day on pre-calving cows. Extended grazing, we talk about this a lot to try and reduce the amount of time that the cow is consuming winter feed rations. It's a good way to reduce costs. Anytime we can get the cow out there harvesting its own feed, we can reduce that over winter feed costs. So we've got 4 different scenarios here: corn grazing, stockpile forage, swath grazing, and crop residue. One of the things that is the most underutilized, I think, in Manitoba is some of that crop residue grazing. But again, we're going to need some agreements and some working together with some of our grain producers to increase the crop residue grazing. But it is one of a very cheap source of grazing out there if we can take advantage of it. Corn grazing with the inputs at about $500 an acre, yielding about 15 ton an acre, we can get that to $1.28 per cow per day. That saves us a significant amount. That's after being fed dollars. So that's just not the winter feed dollars, that's after being fed. So those are the costs down there. Stockpile forage at $1.18, and crop residue is the cheapest at under $1. This is a list of the other operating costs included. Again, absolutely important that everyone goes in there. I cannot tell you how much straw to use. You have to tell me how much straw you use. I cannot tell you, what your vaccination protocol is. You have to go in there and update all those. So each one of those is very dependent on each individual producer. And we do have the budget designed to take inputs from producers to create those, whether it's feeding in yard, corn grazing, to owning all your pasture to renting all your pasture, there are options inside of our budget to calculate all those on an individual basis. Fixed costs, another big cost out there at about $200 per cow. Again, it's all dependent on what you have in there for buildings, machinery and equipment, and what's owned for pasture land. So, something that each one of you will have to go in and update. Total cost of production right now is $1429.40. And we'll talk about revenue in a little bit, but one of the things that this budget now does is puts out some outputs like this chart here, telling you what the debt per cow is. So here, the debt per cow that we can afford is $843 per cow, and that's going to be at 81% equity. So very high equity in here, but it is showing profitability at those levels. Anytime we drop below that or increase our debt per cow, we do start to get into a bit of trouble. Another slide on the same wavelength. As we increase or decrease our equity, we decrease profit overall. So if we go to 50% equity, we can see that our profit is a lot lower than if we have 100% equity. Those farms that have everything paid for and aren't taking opportunity costs are the most profitable out there. But again, as we have the younger generation take over, it just highlights the need to have these costs of productions figured out because there is not that much room for debt in these operations. So we have to place very close attention to those numbers. The question we get a lot is, what can you profitably pay for cows? Well, this tool will now come up with a number, and it's all in how you look at things. So if we have 15% financed and you want to take all of the profit and put it towards a cow and cover total costs, you can pay up to $1,900 per cow. But again, that's taking all of your profit and putting it into buying new cows. So that's what this chart is depicting. If you're only wanting to cover operating fixed, you can pay up to $2,700 if you want to put all of your profit towards buying new cows. So an interesting chart. And again, it's only relevant if you put your own information in. Profitability and break-even analysis. Here we're using an average price of $268.04. Gross revenue per cow is $1464.17. So we are seeing profitability in the industry. It's nice to see. We haven't seen that in the last little while. We have seen increasing costs from land to fertilizer to fuel to now interest rates. So we really have to keep a very close tab on all these costs going in and looking at the marginal returns to make sure that what we're doing is based on strong farm management information that you do have. So the total profit after paying yourself is $35 per calf, and the break-even price is $262. So there is some decent margin in there this year. It's nice to show after last year with such a significant loss, again, depending on what price you're using for feed last year, but it is nice to see the profitability side on the cow-calf. So it just stresses the importance of pricing. We need these prices to hold at 268, 270, or you slip into the red very quickly if those prices are going to slip. Another chart I like to showcase is the cost summary. So the grazing that we've got with the inputs, again, these will be customized when you do yours. The grazing days is about $1.13 per head per day. We have 5 different grazing methods, and we take an equal approach on all 5. But if you want to put in your own costs and improve pasture, marginal pasture, it'll calculate that individually. Extended grazing, an average of $1.18. The yardage, what is the cost of having those cows in your yard and feeding them, and the labor and fuel and things like that is $1.80. The winter feed in itself is $2.34 if we take into account the pre-calving and post $4 on this budget. So yardage calculation is all dependent on individual producers. What is the type of equipment that they're using, and what is the type of infrastructure, and how long are they in there? So I built a bit of a yardage calculation tool to help come up with that very specific thing. This tool will calculate what inventory you have, what machinery you have, and from there, it'll calculate the operating costs, and it'll calculate the fuel depending on the horsepower of tractor you have. Are you running a silage wagon and a second tractor to load the wagon? How many horsepowers, how many days and hours per day are you using it? If you're running 2 hours per day with 2 pieces of equipment, at 175 horsepower tractor loading and they're running 2 hours, that's $15,000 in fuel alone. That $15,000 in fuel alone, could pay for a piece of equipment like this to help reduce some of that fuel. Just an idea. But it is very important to calculate each one of these costs and be up to speed on those. This yardage calculator is new. I do have it. If anyone's interested, contact me and I'll have a chat with them. I'm on the cow-calf cost of production network. I'm the chair for Manitoba. Just wanted to show one quick slide. I thought it was so interesting. It's a cost by winter feed. And what we found across Canada was you can be a low-cost producer in any type of feeding system. You can be a low-cost producer in a hay type system, silage type system, silage hay, or an annual type system. So it really is dependent on each individual producer on calculating what that winter feed cost is. So I just thought that was so fascinating. So I had to throw that up there just to show that these types of operations are so variable that again, these tools are designed to be able to come up with these costs on your own operation to come up with that cost. So next up, very briefly, I'll talk about the background and cost of production. This is the 500 feeders based on 5 to 900 pounds, 5 to 900 pounds, and it's based on a corn silage ration gaining 2.5 pounds average daily gain. This budget, I can't stress feed testing enough. These calves have to have their maintenance and growing needs met, or else they're just not going to gain. So if this is, we're going to do feed tests. I recommend it for the cows as well, just because you have the ability to blend down the feed. Here you have to do the opposite. You have to make sure you have enough energy and protein to get the growth that you want out of these calves. So with, on the summary here, we're about $300 per head on feed costs, and based on a very specific set of assumptions. And I'll go through the ration here in a bit. We do, inside of a ration, have 3 different options to look at if you just want to see what it takes to feed a barley silage ration, corn silage ration, or alfalfa grass hay ration. The average cost per day is here highlighted. It's $2 for a barley silage ration, corn silage $1.94, and alfalfa grass hay ration at $2.12. And that's your feed cost per pound of gain is 87 cents to 91 cents per pound of gain. Again, all these calculations will be done for you if you input these numbers again in this calculator to help each one of you with your numbers. This is the ration slide to show you in 100-pound increments how much feed is required to get the gain that you need. So 500 to 600 pounds, you need 5 pounds alfalfa grass hay, 19 pounds corn silage, and 4 pounds of barley grain to get that 2.5 pound average daily gain targeted with this set of assumptions that I have in that feed. And I did notice that the corn silage isn't that high in energy. So again, you want to make sure that you've done your feed test to make sure that you're not wasting money in barley grain when you've got the energy in the corn silage. So it gives you the cost per day in each one of those weight ranges to see what your cost is on a per head per day. Operating costs, again, I don't want to spend too much time on this. It is so individualized and specific producer dependent that, again, each one of you have to put your own costs in to come up with these. But if we want to talk about this, the biggest cost going in is buying in that feeder. If you are just backgrounding your calf, you do need to make that decision. Is it worth you feeding that calf for the next 2, 3, 4 months? Or are you better off selling it now? So this tool will help you decide whether that makes economic sense or not. So the feeders that we're buying in this budget is a 500-pound steer, and we're raising it from 500 to 900 pounds, and we're selling it with a bit of shrink, because after you raise it to 900 pounds, you have that shrink of selling it, say, to an auction mart. You've got a bit of shrink, so I think we've got about an 873-pound calf marketed at the end of it. So if you're selling it off the yard, you might not realize that shrink. But again, these are the small costs that we have included in there that need to be done by every individual producer to make sure we're coming up with that right cost. Just a chart to show you how the costs are broken apart. And again, the feeder cost is huge. If you're buying ins, you can see why it is so stressful to buy in these calves at the price they are, because that is, the biggest cost going in. Feed cost is the next, and then they're operating to follow that. Fixed costs, again, are so independent of individual producers. There are producers that take advantage of their cow-calf facilities and say they don't have fixed costs. Well, that's fine to look at. But you do have to calculate those, whether the cow takes care of that cost or the calf does, or you split it. But it's still fixed cost that is needed to get those calves grown and marketed. So total cost of production of $2,000. Again, there is still, profitability in the backgrounding side. So this is some interesting times. Even with the increase in costs we have been seeing, there is room for profitability. But because the costs have increased so significantly, it's getting more and more important to know exactly where you're at when it comes to costs. So the break-even purchase price, if you're selling out that 873 pound steer, is $291. If you just want to break even, that's how high you can pay up to for that 500 pound steer coming in. If your break even selling point is, if you're buying that steer in at 285, you need at least 231 out the back end. Anything above or below that, above that on the selling price is now your profit. So if we can get 240 on the other side, we're that much more profitable. So interesting calculations. Again, these will all change as you individually put in your costs. So we'll have all these different costs per pounds of gain sold. We'll have all these marginal returns all calculated for you. So here we are showing return per calf for $33.29 per calf. Just wanted to go through a bunch of the tools that we do have out there on our website. The top one is the cow-calf one that I did talk about. They are available in Excel if you just want to print them out. They're also available in a PDF format, and you can write them in by hand. But really encourage everyone to take a look at these budgets, use them, and help make some heightened farm management decisions based on some of these tools. We do have 150 cow-calf cost of production as well, and that's based on a hay ration. It's not that much different other than the infrastructure we have in there. We can change the 300 cow-calf to a hay ration very quickly as well. It's just highlighting the infrastructure change from a 300 to 150. So these are the tools out there. Wanted to touch a little bit on feed plan. It's available in Excel. It's also available now online. So you can use it on your phone, your iPad, and it will calculate the cheapest cost of protein, energy, based on a very specific set of lists of feed that you do have. So if you have barley, grain, oats, corn silage, hay available to you, you have your moisture available to you, and you have your protein and energy, this tool will now help you decide what is the cheapest and most economical source of protein or energy, depending what you're needing. So a very cool calculator. I encourage anyone to look at that any time of the year to look at where they're at on feed inventory and see what they need to replace. This feed plan cost calculator will help you decide what is the cheapest source of protein or energy based on moisture. So now it helps you decide, is corn silage worth it, or is dry hay worth it, or is DDGs worth it, or is soybean meal, more economical. This tool will now help you make that decision. We also have a bunch of forage cost of productions. In all of our budgets now, we've got agri insurance analysis. So I encourage people to look at those. It is really key with the rising cost to see how we can increase our risk management on our farms. And these tools now do highlight what is available to you in agri insurance. So it allows you to go into your specific risk area, your specific forage designated area, and see what your coverage is, and relay that back to your cost of production information. One of the things I like to highlight in the silage production costs is, on a per quarter basis, we have $150,000 of feed guaranteed per quarter on a corn silage based on a 15 ton. And if you look at on a bale per acre on a hay production system, we're only at $14,000 to $20,000 per quarter covered or forage insured. So something to really look at as our land prices are increasing and all our inputs are increasing. We need that output in some of these productions to make sure that we're covering our risk when it comes to winter feed supply. Pasture days insurance, something else to look at. Not too many people, are rolled up into that program, but something to look at because that is now something that you can be insured for because in 2021, we saw how quickly we're needing forage when that pasture is not growing in a drought year. So something to take a look at. Just another slide showing some of the tools available for land, fence, and buildings. These are the list of the online calculators. One thing I found very useful this year is a farm machinery custom rental rate guide. We can see what that custom cost per bale. If we're getting a baled 5x6, with the increase to fuel from 85 cents that we're used to $1.85, what does that cost per bale mean? And we can go in now with our iPhone because it's available online, change that fuel, and we can quickly see what that cost per bale is on a rental rate calculator. Beef cow overwinter cost calculator, the feed plan one, LPI. I want people to take a look at that one. Another risk management program that we try to analyze and relay it back to our cost of production. There are times that LPI is a very unique tool to help us mitigate some of that risk. And now might be a time to be looking at that. So a lot of different tools. LPI is livestock price insurance. So all these tools are designed to help producers, look at their costs and help analyze their risk and see what insurance programs out there that can help mitigate some of the risks of raising, whether it's forage, livestock, or crop. So with that, I'll wind down. I tried to get in a half hour. It's a lot of information to cover. I'd like to take an hour or two on each one of those budgets to show you how unique we've made these budgets and how interactive they are now. But if each of you want to take time to go in there and do that, that's great. If you got any questions, feel free to contact me and I'd be glad to help you out. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Ben. There's a lot of really good calculators and cost production that are available from the farm management group. So if producers would like a copy, they can stop by their local MASC service center, or you can go online and you can download a copy that then you can put in your own numbers like Ben mentioned. Nothing's more important than putting in your own numbers for your own farm because the costs do vary so much from different parts of the province and different producers' practices. So would Ben mention the feed plan cost calculator? This year, there's a lot of hay around, so the prices have come down, but prices that are still up are some of our supplements, our protein supplements, our DDGs. They're still as expensive as last year or even higher. And our feed grains, our grain prices are still high. So even though our hay prices, our forage prices have come down, we still have some significant levels on some of those other ingredients. So you want to make sure you sharpen the pencil when you're doing your rations. So Pam, did you have any questions for Ben?
There are none, Sean.
I'll try to have all these tools available. We have beef days coming up in January. We also have the Manitoba Beef Producers AGM in Winnipeg this year. So all these extension events, I'll try to have these budgets at these events. So we'll have the hard copy there. So hopefully people can take a look and get to know these budgets and use them on their farm. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Ben. So before we conclude our webinar, we'd just like to mention we have a number of beef and forage days planned around the province. Ericsdale is set for Tuesday, January 10th, starting at 1 o'clock. Grandview is the same day in the evening at 7 o'clock at the Grandview Kinsman Center. And then on Thursday, we're in Rosa from 9 to noon. And then an all-day event is taking place at Austin, starting at 8:45. The keynote topics at all of the sessions will include the Canadian Roundtable for Sustainable Beef, the benefits of cover crops to improve soil health and provide livestock forage, a cattle market update and outlook, and Ask the Vet and animal health update. So these 4 topics will be covered at all the half-day sessions. And then at Austin, there will be in addition to those, a number of industry association updates, and there will be booths set up. So We would like to invite everyone out to attend a session that's in their area. If you can't make Beef and Forage Week, then we will have the highlights on our next Stock Talk, which is on January the 13th, which is a Friday. Following that, we will have a cattle market update on February the 9th, prepping your calves for sale, bull soundness and bull buying tips on March 9th, and forage and pasture management on April the 13th. So mark those dates down. I'd like to encourage you to check out the feed survey. A team led by Emma Stevens from Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada in Lethbridge and Kathy Larson out of the University of Saskatchewan is launching an online feed testing survey. You can go to the link that's on the screen. And they're looking for commercial cow-calf producers from across the prairies with at least 25 cows to complete the survey. And they're going to be asking about winter feeds used, feed testing, ration balancing, etc. Right now, I think in the last survey, it's showing about 40% of producers do feed tests, which is pretty good, but we'd like to see that number higher. And to balance the rations properly, you do want to feed test. We've hired a number of livestock and forage specialists across the province. So Pam Iwanchesko is in Dauphin, new is Cindy Jack in Arberg, Elizabeth Nurnberg is in Roblin, myself in Portage, Andrea Bertholet is in Killarney, so she's new to the livestock and forage team, and also new is Kristen Bouchard Teasdale in Beausejour. So I'd like to welcome those specialists. I'd like to encourage you, if you have any ration, feeds, forage, grazing plan, government program type questions to visit or give them a call. And then we do have 10 MASC Ag Service Centers across the province that you can contact.
Sean,
Yeah.
your slide is not showing. I thought it might have been my screen there because I froze a bit, but there is a comment that your screen is not shared.
Oh. Can you see that
We
now?
can see it now. Yeah, we can.
Sorry about that. I'm not going to run through it all again. Actually, I will just highlight the screens. So here's our specialists that I mentioned. The feed survey and the website that you can go to. The 10 offices across the province, the MASC service centers. And then on our website, if you're looking for different livestock or crop production or farm management information, you can see on the right-hand side is a link to StockTalk. And there's also a link to the hay and pasture and feeds listing if you're wanting to sell hay, or if you're wanting to buy hay, you can have a look there. And then the next webinar is on January the 13th. And we'll cover the Beef and Forage Week highlights. I will just go back up quickly and show you those dates again for Beef and Forage Days, just so that they're recorded on the webinar. So Ericsdale, January the 10th, starting at 1, Grandview in the evening on January 10th, starting at 7, and Rosa, 9 o'clock at the Rosa Hall. So that concludes today's Stock Talk. I'd like to thank Aaron behind the scenes and Pam for all their assistance. And thank you for joining. I hope you'll join us next time on January the 13th, or can attend one of the Beef and Forage Day events. Thank you and have a good day.